Michael Lorenzen is coming back to Kansas City. What do we think of the move? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, you know the drill by now. For the usual listeners, I work here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, where new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, finally, we have some activity on the free agent front for the Kansas City Royals. As you know by now, our episodes were going to be Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. That was the plan for the month of January. We'll be back to normal. I think the date is going to be February 10th. But for the month of January, it was going to be Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, unless there was some activity. And then ever since the Jonathan India trade, not much has happened. We've had a minor league deal here and there. I think I've expressed it very openly over the last few weeks that, hey, we're just waiting for a move to happen. Give us some new things to talk about. And that day has finally come. I moved up the episode from Tuesday to today because as of about 30 minutes ago, the Royals have made their first major league deal of the offseason. If you don't count Michael Walker being a free agent because they re-signed him before he could really hit free agency. Jonathan India was a trade. Michael Lorenzen is the first major league deal the Royals make in 2025, or I guess the offseason of 2024. In 2025, he is back on a one-year deal that is worth $7 million. This is per Jeff Passan. He also has a second-year mutual option for $12 million, and I believe toward the Royals, I think it's $5.5 million that he'll be making in 2025. For what the market had been, this feels like a very good move for both sides. And I found myself saying that multiple times throughout this offseason. When it comes to the Royals making some of these moves, I call it a good move for both sides. I don't feel like the Royals overpaid. I don't think Michael Lorenzen or anybody they got really got underpaid. I mean, considering the way this market has been, I think $7 million for a swing starter, which is what they were looking for, is very good value. Considering what Michael Lorenzen is bringing to this team. You know that when he was healthy for your club last year, he was very effective. And that injury he suffered in Cleveland really set him back, I think, and prevented him from maybe making more money in free agency. So I know it came at the expense of Michael Lorenzen making more money, but if he stayed healthy and he didn't have that hamstring injury in Cleveland, I think Michael Lorenzen makes a little bit more than $7 million. And maybe he outprices himself from Kansas City. And that's something now where the Royals don't need to worry about it. I think that it gives them great insurance when moving Chris Bubich to the rotation. I mean, there can be competition in camp. We all know there's going to be competition in camp. But Michael Lorenzen is fine as this team's number 4 starter. I imagine right now that will be the play, is Michael Lorenzen being the number 4 starter. And then like we saw last spring training, there's that open competition for the 5 spot, whether that be Chris Bubich, whether that be Kyle Wright, whether that be Alec Marsh. They're going to be able to battle it out. But right now, I think Michael Lorenzen has the best chance to be more of a lock into the rotation than what we thought the swing starter might be. And it is kind of humorous because about 2 to 3 hours before this deal happened, I was reading an article on The Athletic by Jim Bowden, and he predicted where the remaining top 15 free agents would go. And Jose Quintana of the Mets last year, who I thought turned in a very exceptional season considering the expectations for him, and was great in the postseason, I thought, for the Mets, especially in one of those games against Philadelphia. But he predicted Jose Quintana would sign with the Royals. And I thought that would be a great fit. He wrote down in the article it would be a perfect fit. And then 2 hours later, the Royals signed Michael Lorenzen. So that deal kind of gets shot down. If there was any interest there for Jose Quintana, that was shot dead a few hours after I read that article. So Michael Lorenzen coming back certainly gives the insurance. And I think more importantly, it gives them the insurance to move Kris Bubic to the rotation. I know it's not really a popular thought with some people out there, but Kris Bubic shouldn't be expected to jump into this rotation and throw 180 innings. That would just be foolish to do. He was a reliever last year. He had Tommy John the year before. Same thing with Kyle Wright. If Kyle Wright wins a job out of camp, you don't say, hey, after missing the last year and a half, we're expecting you to get the same inning workload that Brady Singer got. That would be foolish to do, and I don't think the Royals would be looking at that for either of those guys to give them that type of inning workload. Michael Lorenzen gives you that help where, there's going to be outings where Kris Bubic gets cut short or Alec Marsh gets cut short. And if Michael Lorenzen's not in the rotation, he's the perfect guy to throw in a spot as a bit of that swing guy, that long relief guy. We even saw in the postseason, he could be a one-inning guy. Now, that was more so to me because of the postseason circumstances and not so much of, hey, he can be a setup guy. I think the Royals like him in a bit of a hybrid role. But he could go into camp and win one of those jobs. I'd imagine with him signing in Kansas City, there is the belief that he will have one of those jobs. I don't think he would have turned away other offers to come in and be a long reliever for the Royals. So right now, as I'm doing this episode, I think Michael Lorenzen will be a starter in the rotation come opening day. I think right now you're looking at Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, Michael Lorenzen, and then my gut would tell me Kris Bubic. I think Kris Bubic is going to win that job coming out of camp. To me, that feels like a little bit of an upgrade over the rotation from last year. If you have similar numbers from Michael Wacha, from Seth Lugo, and Cole Reagan. I mean, a lot of it hinges on what those guys can do. But considering who the number 4 and number 5 were last year, Brady Singer and Alec Marsh, and then Brady Singer and Michael Lorenzen, and then you had Daniel Lynch in there for a little bit. I think this is far more stable, and I think with Bubic making that transition back to the rotation, I think the upside increases. I think you can have the workload with Michael Lorenzen throwing anywhere from 150 to 170 innings, and then you can bank on that upside of Kris Bubic giving you a really solid 130 to 140. Maybe a little bit less than that, depending how much they want to stretch him out. But I think you can really see this rotation kind of coming into form a little bit. And I understand that there's some uneasiness right now among the fan base of, well, how are they going to get their next bat? Are they going to increase payroll? Are they going to make another move? I think we're going down the list right now of what they sought after in free agency, what they sought after through trade. They had a checklist. Okay. They had, if we're going to go through this piece by piece, they had a little checklist. They had priorities. Number 1 was a leadoff bat. They got that in Jonathan India. They feel like they upgraded. I'm going to go as far to say that was an upgrade in making that move for Jonathan India and only having to give up Brady Singer. They also got to throw in 4th outfielder and Joey Wiemer, who was a former top 100 prospect. So I like the trade on the surface. Still want to see what Jonathan India can do in a Royals uniform. They wanted to make sure this rotation could stay in place, that they could run it back with pretty much the same group. And even though they lost Brady Singer, they could replace him in that production. Michael Wacha did not hit the open market. That was a big deal to keep him in Kansas City. I think he was probably the most consistent arm they had in the rotation over the final 2 months of the season. So you have your top 3 guys back. Reagan's is under team control. Lugo's under contract. Wacha's under contract. How do you replace Brady Singer? Well, you bring back Michael Lorenzen on a team-friendly deal, and I think also a little bit of a player-friendly deal, if you can even say that in the same sentence. 1 year, $7 million, that's not going to kill you. I always say that 1-year deals, even if they are $15 million, $16 million, they're not going to kill you, right? And then the number 5 spot, you got competition there. Kris Bubic, Alec Marsh, Kyle Wright, Noah Cameron. Throw who you want in there for that spot, but I feel like for the most part, People like this move for Michael Lorenzen. So there's another box that you just checked. They said they wanted a role player, a left-handed hitting third baseman. I know it was a minor league deal, but I kind of feel like Cavan Biggio is going to win that job out of camp. I do think that they love the walk rate. We're going to talk about him here in the second segment. But I think, looking at what Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson gave you, why not roll the dice on the upside of Cavan Biggio and him returning to form a little bit back in, 2019 and maybe a little bit of 2023 as well. Because last year he bounced around baseball, was with like 3 or 4 different teams, but it's a minor league deal. And I love minor league deals because there's no downside to them. They don't work out. You cut bait. There's no harm, no foul. They work out. You look like a genius because you're barely paying the guy and he's giving you value. So Cavan Biggio was the role player, the left-handed hitting third baseman. I believe right now, that's the move. That was the move they wanted to make to replace Adam Frazier. So are you fine with Cavan Biggio over Adam Frazier? I think right now for that price, considering they gave Adam Frazier a major league deal last year, this feels like a good decision for the Royals for him to win a job out of camp. So now it comes down to bullpen depth. I'd imagine they're still going to go out there and find somebody for the bullpen. And then that middle of the order bat, I still think that's another box that needs to be checked. I don't think they're going to be sitting on their hands. If anything, they're going to try to get the free agent deals done. So I think up next would be bullpen help. And then they can maybe make a trade here maybe before the end of January or early February to get that middle of the order bat when teams might be a little bit more desperate to make a trade. So there's still boxes to be checked, but they're kind of going down the list here. I'm still not panicking with the outfield and what it looks like. I'd imagine they're going to make a move, but right now they're also buttoning up a couple areas they certainly wanted to address going into this offseason. So that's the breaking news of today. The Royals re-signed Michael Lorenzen per Jeff Passan to a 1-year, $7 million deal. Mutual option, I believe, for a second year worth up to $12 million. So I think a good deal for both sides, Michael Lorenzen and the Royals involved there. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk a litlittle bit about that Cavan Biggio deal. Do we like it? And more importantly, do we think it's actually going to work out in spring training? That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Visit the website and share betting lines around your team or league. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Make this postseason unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. For my pick, I'm going to go wild card weekend, Ravens and Steelers. Give me the over on rushing yards for Derrick Henry, and I'll take an anytime touchdown for King Henry as well against that Steelers defense. Let's continue with our talk of acquisitions the Royals made over the last 24 hours or so. The big one, of course, happened a little under 45 minutes ago, and Michael Lorenzen coming back to Kansas City on a 1-year deal worth $7 million. Still think they're going to be a little bit more active this offseason. Hopefully, a move like this has kind of opened up the floodgates a little bit more, and now we can see some more deals happen. I don't expect them to make 5, 6, 7 more deals this offseason, but I could see some bullpen help, and I still expect them to make that middle of the order bat trade because I don't see them running it back with the same outfield in 2025. What I do think was interesting they made, or the deal they made the other day, was Cavan Biggio on a minor league deal. And at one point in time, Cavan Biggio, a legacy, of course, in Major League Baseball with his dad being in the big leagues as well. He was a big-time prospect for the Blue Jays, and the baby Blue Jays, I believe they called him. You had Vladdy Jr., you had Bo Bichette, and you had Cavan Biggio. Like, he was in that conversation for those top prospect guys. He was a big name, and honestly, in his first year, he lived up to it a little bit. I think when he first broke into the big leagues, the numbers were impressive enough, and he was so young. There was a lot to like about his game. I thought he had a very smooth left-handed swing. That's more so just the baseball fan in me. When you look at a guy's swing, you might like the player just because of that aspect of their game. They might not have good numbers. They might not be very good in general, but if they have a good swing, you might like the player a little bit more. And I always thought Cavan Biggio had a very, very smooth swing. And in that first year, he had a 3.0 WAR. And that was something in 100 games that felt pretty impressive to me. At the same time, though, that was 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. And that player to me is long gone. He had a 364 OBP in his rookie season, and it's all kind of gone downhill from here. He had a fine sophomore season, but since then, we've just not seen the same Cavan Biggio since that COVID year. Defensively, not very good. He's a super utility guy. He can play all over. I think he fits that profile a little bit of what the Royals were wanting, a left-handed hitting third baseman. No, it's not Josh Rojas, who we thought it would be. It's not Brett Beatty. Feels like Cavan Biggio was a very cheap, bounce-back type guy that you put on the bench and maybe you hope for the best. If there's one thing that I do like about his game, and this has always been constant, this has always been consistent, he's got a great walk rate. There's not been a single season in his major league career where his walk rate dipped below double digits. That's something I believed intrigued the Royals. And even though he spent time in Toronto last year, he spent time with the Dodgers, he spent time with the Braves, none of it really worked out, and he hit 197. He had a 314 OBP. And I think for an everyday player, there are more numbers you need to look at, which going into last year, I think Cavan Biggio was on his last legs in Toronto. I'm not just saying that because he ended up being let go, but to me, I think they always expected more from him offensively, more than just the walk rate, right? They wanted to see more of the power. They wanted to see the swing and miss get cut down. But there were years that I thought, a walk rate around 12% was good enough and could mask some of those flaws. But defensively, there were issues no matter where you put him. He went from a top of the order guy to a bottom of the order guy. And the Blue Jays, I think, just kind of got tired of waiting. And he had sort of gotten past that, well, he's a young 24, 25-year-old. He's figuring things out. And he was so good early on in his career that you felt like he'd only get better. But the Blue Jays weren't winning. They kind of got tired of waiting. They let go of a guy like Cavan Biggio. The Dodgers, they rolled the dice. I remember he was in LA when the Royals played the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium and didn't really work out there. I think he was also in the minor league system for the Giants. He really bounced around. But I look at what the Royals would be hoping to get out of Cavan Biggio and what they had off the bench last year. So off the bench, you had Freddie Fermin as your catcher. You had Adam Frazier. You had Garrett Hampson. You had Dairon Blanco. They gave Garrett Hampson a major league deal. They gave Adam Frazier a major league deal. Nick Lofton was up on a very cheap deal. It was still his rookie contract. You had Dairon Blanco up there for basically nothing. But I looked at what you were getting for a handful of those guys, and you thought, man, is that really worth a major league deal? Or are you better off giving somebody a minor league deal and it working out and you feel like a genius in making that move? Cavan Biggio, I do not think is going to return to the form of what you might remember him as. Because keep in mind, he was with 4 or 5 different teams last year. They tried things out with him. It didn't work out. So the question becomes, why the Royals? Why would the Royals be able to unlock something with Cavan Biggio that these other teams, including one being the Dodgers, who might be the best at turning guys' careers around, they couldn't make it work with him? I think it's because it's a low-risk deal. Cavan Biggio is going to be showing up to camp with nothing to lose here. There's no expectation for Cavan Biggio. But with that walk rate and with his ability to play other positions, not that well, but I'm more so looking at the offensive ability of him, man, you just get a little bit back of what you once were. I think that's a pretty significant upgrade over what Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier were. Because I look at these 2023 numbers, and I know that it's something that we fall victim to a lot. When you want a player to work out, you go, oh, well, look what he did 2 years ago. We've done that with Kyle Wright this offseason. Look what he did back in 2022. Then you look up at the calendar and it's 2025. At what point do you go, that player just might be gone? That might have been an outlier. That might have been a fluke. With Cavan Biggio, I look at what he did in 2023, and I ask myself, is that good enough to have off the bench? He played 111 games. He had a WRC plus of 102. That's 2 points above the league average. He had a 340 OBP, a 710 OPS. He had 90 RBI and 9 home runs. I think off the bench, those would be fine numbers. And maybe even minimize that a little bit. Maybe not 111 games. Maybe we're talking 85. You give him the same type of workload that Adam Frazier had, which I do think was closer to 111 than 85. But you have a little bit more power there. You have better on-base numbers. You might feel a little bit better about putting him in the lineup than you did with Adam Frazier, and you're paying him less. I think that is the big difference here. Now, let me be very clear. Cavan Biggio could show up to camp and be terrible, and the Royals cut him, and that's just the way it works out because at the end of the day, it's a minor league deal. But now I think you're starting to see a little bit of the method to why they didn't sign somebody like Josh Rojas. Now, I actually haven't seen what that deal ended up being. I know it was a one-year deal. I can't remember the money involved in it. But the Royals might have looked at it and said, okay, Rojas was going to be a bench guy for us anyway. He's not playing every single day. And even though he's better than Cavan Biggio, had a better year than Cavan Biggio, is it more effective for us as a front office to sign somebody who's not going to play every day for give or take $3 or $4 or $5 million? Or do we roll the dice on a minor league deal and maybe Cavan Biggio gives you his 2023 form and you're barely paying him? Therefore, you save some money for a guy like Michael Lorenzen and some bullpen help. I think there's some more intricacies to that than maybe we were thinking about when the White Sox signed Josh Rojas. I'm not trying to make an excuse for the Royals not ponying up to get a guy like that because, as I said, a one-year deal shouldn't really scare you away regardless of what type of money is involved because it's a one-year deal. But with Cavan Biggio, I'll be honest, I like the roll of the dice here. Doesn't work out, doesn't work out. No harm, no foul. It's a minor league deal. Does work out, you're barely paying a guy to be on your bench, and he could maybe be a good pinch hitter late because he does have that great walk rate. If there's one thing he does well, he walks a lot, he doesn't chase. Everything else about his game in 2024 was not good, including on the defensive side of things. But you're talking about a bench guy here, a role player. I think it's worth taking a chance on, and I'll be curious to see what he looks like coming up at Surprise, Arizona for spring training. Again, only 37 days away from when pitchers and catchers report. And then, of course, the players will be showing up for a full squad workout a little bit after that. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. Now what's next? The Royals brought in Cavan Biggio. They brought in Michael Lorenzen. What will be the next move for them? And maybe more importantly, who else is out there to go out and get? That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in Gametime. I know the holiday season is now wrapped up, but that doesn't mean you can't give out gifts for people or buy yourself something over at Gametime. See which bands are coming into town. Look at the upcoming schedule for Royals or whatever fan you may be. I mean, sometimes I always try to say that it's only Royals fans that watch this podcast. I don't know. Maybe it's baseball fans out there. You're wanting to go to a game wherever you may be listening. Head over to Gametime, download that app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. I've already bought a couple tickets coming up for 2025 over at Gametime. I got my notifications on, so I know when some deals are rising, when they're dropping. It's just a fun app to use. Even if you're not going to buy that day, just keep them in your back pocket, and you can check Gametime the day of the game, the day of the concert, or maybe a little bit in advance. But again, download that app, use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase over at Gametime. Now the question's going to become, what's next for this ball club? You had a little bit of a spark. I think it gave everybody a nice breath of fresh air talking about Michael Lorenzen, talking about Cavan Biggio. There's some activity out there that we can discuss when it comes to Royals baseball. Like I said, 37 days before pitchers and catchers report in Surprise, Arizona, you would like to see some more moves being made by Kansas City if they are going to be making another run at the postseason, and maybe one step further, winning this division, getting a bye early on, and getting some early home playoff games. That absolutely is the goal. And for so much of this offseason, I think we've been going back and forth on if we really believe they've got enough in the tank. I mean, because there is logic in what we had last year was good enough to get in the postseason. And even if you do have a loaded team, look at the Yankees. Doesn't guarantee you win a World Series. They did get to the World Series, but they lost in 5 games. It is a crapshoot. I think any postseason is a crapshoot. There's tougher ones. Like the NCAA tournament is the ultimate crapshoot. You got different seeds winning every single year. In the NFL, there usually are the top contenders that are there when it's all said and done. There's been those dark horse team years and Cinderella stories, but for the most part, we've seen mostly the best teams be there in the end. You had the dynasty with the Patriots. Now you got the dynasty with the Chiefs. In baseball, this past season was really the first time in a long time that two expensive teams got there when it was all said and done. But I will also say this, not just because the Royals were in it, but this postseason was electric. It was absolutely phenomenal with all these great moments, great calls from broadcasters, intense moments. I loved every bit of it. And the Dodgers and Yankees got a lot of eyeballs, and I think that was great for the sport, even if it did piss you off a little bit that the Yankees and Dodgers were there. But the previous year, you had the Rangers and the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks were an absolute Cinderella team. Nobody thought they'd be there. They just got their foot in the door, and they got hot at the right time. So it brings me back to my point of, the Royals could look at their team and say, hey, we're a few pieces away from getting us over the hump, where if we run into the Yankees again, we could have a team that can compete with Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton and Garrett Cole and now Max Fried. And right now, I still would say no, they're not good enough to compete with a team like the Yankees. But there is still time to add to this team. And we discussed this bullpen not too long ago. And I feel like this bullpen still needs another piece or two just to strengthen it and give some extra depth there, because you're going to lose guys in the bullpen. That's just the reality of the sport. Guys are going to go down due to injury. Guys are going to struggle, and you want to have some good pieces to replace them with. Not hoping somebody works out. You want to know what you're getting. And I think right now, Lucas Erceg might be the only guy you feel really good about. Maybe if you're more optimistic, you like what John Schreiber and Sam Long were able to do. Maybe you're really optimistic and you think Hunter Harvey can bounce back. But there's a lot of, they got to do it again, or they got to bounce back. And for the bullpen, I think that's the next thing to address here. There are a ton, and I mean a ton of bullpen arms out there. And I believe the market is completely frozen when it comes to relief arms out there, which I don't think is a bad thing, because it's given the Royals time to evaluate what the market may look like for the relievers. And when those top guys, the Carlos Estevezes, the Kirby Yateses, the Tanner Scotts, when they get a deal in place, and even though Kirby Yates is over 40, I think he could get a $14, $15 million deal. You're able to evaluate it a little bit more, then you can make that move and go out there and get yourself a David Robertson. I think David Robertson would pair so nicely at the back end of the bullpen. And you're not recreating HDH. You just don't have that type of talent in the bullpen. But I think for some of those older guys, you could look at a one-year deal and say, hey, maybe you're the ninth inning guy, maybe you're the setup guy. Another name that comes to mind is Kenley Jansen. Kenley Jansen was pretty effective for the most part for Boston. You put him in an eighth, ninth inning role alongside Lucas Erceg and Hunter Harvey, you feel a little bit better about where you are than maybe where you're at right now. But to me, I think the bullpen could use two arms, and maybe one of those is a major league arm, and the next one is a minor league deal arm, where you roll the dice like you did with Sam Long and it worked out for you. Maybe you go that route. You give a little bit more competition in spring training for the bullpen. Guys might go down in spring training, and you want to make sure that you've got some good reinforcement, because I thought for the most part, this Royals team overachieved in 2024, but there still was a lot to be desired with the team. There were some blown games from the bullpen early on when they didn't really have everything in place. You have that more in place in 2025. Some of those early struggles they had disappear a little bit. You've got more confidence and more consistency from the relief corps, and that may be the difference in you being 86-76 and 90-72 and winning the division. Just a few games here and there with a good bullpen could be that difference. Cleveland certainly showcased that, and Detroit sure as hell showcased that when they got red hot in August and all the way into September. So you don't always need to overpay for a bullpen arm, but I do think once this market gets going, the Royals are going to be able to wait it out and find somebody that's very affordable to add to that bullpen. That's what I believe will be next. And then that final piece will be acquiring a middle-of-the-order bat, which I still think right now, from what's been said previously in the offseason, I think it's going to be through trade and not through free agency. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Aren't going to be bringing you an episode now until Wednesday or Thursday. Maybe we'll have another move to talk about, or we'll dive a little bit deeper into this starting rotation. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.